Hello, class. This is Dr. Dilmar. Can you believe it that you have already made it to week 4? Pretty incredible, right? I know it just has to feel so good to be almost at the finish line of another class. Another feather in your cap, another accomplishment, and that much closer to reaching your goals. So, congratulations. You may not feel that today because you may be thinking, oh my gosh, I have all this work to do to finish up this or other classes that you're in. But I just wanted to kind of share that the light at the end of the tunnel is there and it's not a train, right? I wanted to just check in with you a little bit about where we are with the class. Of course, we're in week 4. Hopefully you feel like it's pretty routine at this point. You have a discussion board, you get feedback, you interact with myself and your classmates, and then you have your work in McGraw-Hill. So it's pretty much routine probably at this point. But of course, if you need anything, just text me or email me. You will find that I've curved a few quizzes. So over the next day or so, if you see your grade adjusted a little bit and you think, oh, I haven't turned anything else in, it's just because I went back and adjusted a few questions on a few quizzes. So I wanted to really check in with you about the discussion for this week, which is discussing financial statements and how those are used in business decisions. I'm assuming most of you want to be either maybe not business owners, but you may also want to be a leader, a manager, an executive officer, or a CFO, something of that nature. Just because you work for a company doesn't mean that you aren't in the position to have to make really heavy decisions and weigh financial records and things of that nature. And so whether or not you're in a business of your own, or you're working with partners, or you're some type of leader or manager, executive officer, etc., understanding financial statements are important. And I think I'll start with what I'm also going to end with is that financial statements are not just black and white. You might think, oh, it's just numbers, just tell me what they say. But financial statements can really be maneuvered, and I hate to use the word manipulated, but you could possibly manipulate financial statements. There's a lot of things that could be in a sense presented to tell a story, because it's kind of like history or a person's side of a story of an argument. We are all going to tell the story that best fits our needs and outcomes. So I want you to really think about financial statements, not just through the mathematical perspective of making sure it's checks and balances, but also in how you would use this in a business decision, and what type of maybe red flags and cautionary things you need to look out for. So, of course, before you do that, you have to understand what they are. And so in the material this week and in your discussion board, you're looking at the importance of these financial statements in making business decisions. So first of all, why do businesses even need financial statements? So of course, a business is not always just trying to maybe be sold or getting endorsements or making deals and mergers, but they also need to evaluate their own performance. So it's kind of a self-reflection and evaluation so that you can plan for growth, adjustments, and also there's legal requirements that need to be met. So that's some of the purposes of business rationale for having financial statements. And then, of course, there's investment decisions, right? So not just mergers or you're going to sell a business. Maybe you're going to be part of a business that's looking to do a deal with someone else. But there's also investment decisions and long-term, not just short-term, but long-term goals as well, cost control, etc. So essentially, a balance sheet is probably the core part of a financial statement, which is the math, right? Where you look at the assets, the liabilities, the equity. And so that's a really core part of a financial statement that allows you to see that financial stability or where you're in the red or the black. So I would say that that's a core part of it. Of course, it's not the end all be all of a financial statement, but it's certainly one of the most critical pieces to understand. And then this is where you can really look at the revenue and the expenses and measure what's called profitability, right? So are you really making a profit, or are you just covering the expenses? Sometimes cash coming in doesn't always equal a profit. And so these statements allow you to kind of see if there's any shortages. And then, I mentioned before that, if you're a manager or a leader or a business owner, etc., then you may be using financial statements. But also, if you're an investor or you work with an investment company, or maybe you're wanting to work with investors, and financial statements are important. And then finally, if you are a creditor, right, or you work for a company that's in charge of credit lines and a bank, right, if you want to work for a bank, something of that nature, then of course financial statements are core to that work. So financial statements guide your planning. They're essential for transparency. I mentioned what I'm going to start with and end with, which is that manipulation of financial records. So, when people overstate revenue, you can see the number on the paper, but where did that number come from? So it's really important to understand and learn about financial records so that you can go back and possibly see, okay, where did the money come from? So is it cash? Is it credit card sales, right? What's the evidence? So I would always say, what's the documentation and what's the evidence to support what's on the paper? Because a lot of times financial records are going to be a summary with numbers on a sheet of paper. So ask yourself, what's the evidence? Show me how you can prove. And you may not have to go through every single line item, but you certainly want to pick some key aspects to fact check. And once you fact check a few things and it works out, then you're okay, I can trust these records a little bit more. I have a little bit more trustworthiness to this. They're a little bit more credible, right? If you have some evidentiary type things to support those financial records. So I would certainly say revenue is one of those important pieces to check. And then the hiding of expenses, right? So sometimes, people like to get into business and they don't really understand a business. And part of that is not just experience and know-how, but it's also being able to find things that are hidden. So there's a lot of hidden cost in businesses. Just because you sell food, for example, it's not just food costs that you have to worry about. It's the cost of the insurance, the rent, the electricity, the employee's cost, not just their salary, but the cost to have an employee, the insurance for the employee, right? So you got the insurance for the business, the insurance for the employee. You've got, just a litany of hidden expenses that may or may not have been considered. So the more you know a business, the more you can know what expenses are included or not. And then, of course, making sure that if someone says they have an asset, such as a vehicle or a piece of equipment, or even a building for sure, or land, you really want to make sure you double check some of those values of the asset. So there's some things that's a little bit easier to check. And again, once you fact check some of those more readily available items to fact check, then it gives you some credibility for the rest. And then, of course, checking records over time, dipsticking at random times, not just looking at it for one specific time point. Comparing to industry norms, if something doesn't smell right, it probably isn't. And then, of course, if you're working for a business and you're worried about some type of internal inconsistency, or if you're looking at mergers or buying a business, etc., you can always have a third party audit the records, and they would be more proficient, probably faster, and of course more knowledgeable about looking for some of these things. All right. Well, I will count on you to continue doing the work that you're doing, and I appreciate all of you in your demeanor. I do want to give you a special shout out for those of you who have been participating so substantially in our discussion board week to week. Really just very complex thinking, critical thinking. You're adding value to our learning community, and that's so important. So shout out to you and keep that up for week 4. Talk soon. Bye.